Hello friends, my name is Ihor Havryshchak. Today is May 17th, a Saturday. I would like to review the most important news from this crazy world, which primarily concern us, Ukrainians, and our Ukraine. Putin's office addressed Zelenskyy with the conditions for a possible meeting between the dictator and our president. Donald Trump commented on the results of the Istanbul talks firstly, and shocked by whitewashing the Kremlin. Ukrainian forces crushed Putin's helicopter and deoccupied a village in Donetsk region, and there were powerful explosions in Crimea. Subscribe to YouTube 24. Subscribe to my YouTube resource, which is at the bottom of the description. Like this video. Write down where you are watching from, your comments, suggestions, and questions. We really want to have feedback from you. Share our conversation, because that's how YouTube's algorithms work. Thus, we promote Ukrainian language YouTube, communicate our pro-Ukrainian position with you. I start with our Ukrainian Defense Forces. SSU drones hit the ammunition depot of the 126th Coastal Defense Brigade of the Russian Federation in the temporarily occupied Crimea, reported by sources in the SSU. The attack was yesterday, on May 16th. The drones organized serious explosions at the ammunition depots of the 126th Coastal Defense Russian Brigade, located near the village of Perevalne in Crimea. There were boxes for storing military equipment, weapons, and fuel and lubricants, the Security Service of Ukraine said. There are videos on the internet that show a powerful detonation, a real Hollywood-style explosion. The Russians are saying the situation is serious. They had to block the Simferopol-Alushta highway, passed by the village of Perevalne. There is also information about the occupiers' dead military personnel who were in the exploding military warehouse. And this is good news, and we bow low to our defenders. It is also known that the Special Operations Forces of the Ballista Unit hit a Russian K-52 helicopter. It is also called Alligator. It is considered the flagship among the helicopters of the Russian Federation, and it is really a thunderstorm of any armor, and especially tanks. They work well on our tanks. The Tactical Strike Unmanned Aerial Vehicle System Bombus was used, as our defenders say. The K-52 Alligator tried to organize a combat patrol over Ukrainian fields, but a group of tactical strike bombs was already waiting in the sky. Accurate work, cold calculation, and another minus in the occupiers' fleet. We will continue to work, said the Special Forces soldiers. Moreover, there are already reports that the crew of the occupiers did not survive. Our defenders managed to deoccupy the village of Bohatyr in the Novopavlivka direction. When Putin announced a pseudo-ceasefire on Victory Day, the occupiers quietly tried to enter Bohatyr and hang their flag rag there. Then the occupiers were eliminated, the rag was burned, and now our fighters have driven the Russians out of this village by 95%. The 33rd Separate Mechanized Brigade continues to hold the village, despite the Russian statement. Last night, the Russians tried to get into Bohatyr with 10 infantrymen and 4 motorcycles, each with 2 occupants. Accordingly, the liquidation of 14 freaks from this group was confirmed. As a result, our defenders hung our Ukrainian flag in the village of Bohatyr. This is a very difficult area, and I thank and bow to our defenders. Now about political developments and what is happening in geopolitics, of course, in the context of the meetings on May 15-16 in Istanbul. The Kremlin has said that a meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Russian dictator Putin is possible in the future, but only if certain conditions are met. This was stated by Putin spokesman Peskov, commenting on the talks held in Istanbul. We quote Peskov, "As a result of the work of the delegations of the two sides, if certain agreements are reached, they consider it possible," he said. For Russia, when signing documents between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations, the main and fundamental thing is who exactly from Ukraine will sign these documents. They will again put pressure on the illegitimacy of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and they also say that there will be a meeting if something is achieved. And it is unclear what can be achieved with the occupiers under their conditions. Peskov added Russia and Ukraine agreed to exchange lists of ceasefire conditions. The work is underway. About next round, Peskov said that the agreements reached in Istanbul, including the 1,000 for 1,000 exchange of prisoners, should be implemented first. No contacts between Russia and the United States since the talks in Istanbul. Putin and Trump will consider it appropriate to have a telephone conversation. They denied Trump's words about calls and meetings with Putin soon. The most important thing is that we will be able to bring back our 1,000 defenders. The lists are already being formed, and this is the main thing we need to know from the meeting in Istanbul. No one has officially announced the Kremlin's terms, but they are known. A large number of Western authoritative publications write about them, citing their sources, and there is already partial confirmation that the Kremlin and Putin absolutely do not want any compromises. They are only interested in Ukraine's surrender, and Trump turns a blind eye to this. But before that, I want to tell you that Putin has signed a decree on simplified Russian citizenship for citizens of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Citizens of partially recognized states can apply for citizenship by submitting an application to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. I quoted a propaganda publication when I said partial recognition. This is the territory of Georgia, and that's it. You may recall that in April 2019, this is how Putin allowed Donbas residents, Ukrainians, to take Russian citizenship in a simplified manner. You know what happened next, so we can predict what will happen to Abkhazia and North Ossetia. Although Russia has long recognized them as alleged republics, no one else recognized just some Nicaragua and all those who were paid by Putin or forced to do so. And so no one else. Obviously, it is quite possible that in the near future, Putin will decide to annex these territories to Georgia. The Kremlin's conditions are absurd. Please share your thoughts, impressions, and emotions in the comments. The head of Moscow's delegation, aide to the Russian dictator Medinsky, named a number of maximalist demands from the Kremlin during talks in Istanbul with representatives of Ukraine. The Economist reports on them, among other things. The head of the Russian delegation at the negotiating table with representatives of Ukraine and Turkey voiced 5 demands. There was supposed to be a meeting with the participation of the United States delegation, but the Russians, occupiers, and terrorists insisted that the Americans not be present. They want to visually represent the 2022 negotiations. They say that this is a continuation of 2022. Our delegation said that the only thing in common between 2022 and 2025 is the venue, Istanbul. And it is very significant that our delegation listened to this nonsense from the Russians through Ukrainian interpreters. And this is a key, indicative, and excellent move by our delegation. 5 demands from Russia: Ukraine's neutrality, refusal to pay reparations, the rights of Russian speakers, recognition of the occupied Ukrainian territories, and the withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from a number of regions for an immediate ceasefire. On Ukraine's neutrality, there should be no foreign troops or weapons of mass destruction on the country's territory, similar to the Austrian model of neutrality. We will just put our hands behind our backs and say, "Welcome, Russian occupier." No reparations. Both sides are supposed to renounce any claims for compensation for damages caused by the war. It's interesting. I suppose in the future they will say that we have entered the Kursk region, so we are not required to pay reparations. And they will not pay reparations for destroyed Ukraine worth hundreds of billions. And the rights of Russian speakers. Ukraine must adopt European standards on minority rights and put an end to nationalist propaganda. They are hiding behind European standards. But, there is no Russia launching cruise missiles on the border with Germany. Therefore, we do not need to apply double standards here. Recognition of territories. Ukraine should not deny the constitutional claims of the Russian Federation to 5 Ukrainian regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Crimea. The Kremlin seeks recognition for the occupied territories. The conditions for an immediate ceasefire. This is the ultimatum that was proposed by the coalition of the willing, which Trump supported, and now he is backing out of it. The terms of the ceasefire are that Ukraine's forces are to withdraw from 5 regions. The Economist reports that Medinsky said the following during these talks: "We don't want war, but we are ready to fight for a year, 2, 3, however long this confrontation, this war in Ukraine, takes. We have been at war with Sweden for 21 years. How long are you willing to fight? Peter the Great. Who financed him? England and France. Sweden would still be a great power today, if not for this. Where is Sweden and where is Russia? Sweden is a civilized country with an average income that Russians have never even dreamed of." To summarize, Russia rejected Donald Trump's proposal for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. This is the 3rd or 4th time that Putin has turned down Trump. But what does Trump say? Trump commented on the Turkish talks for the first time. The U.S. president rejected the suggestion that Russia is not fully involved in the Ukrainian settlement process. He said this in an interview with CNN. CNN is a Democratic channel, which means it supports Democrats. And Fox News is for the Republicans, in fact, the party from which Trump ran. According to him, he was not going to Istanbul himself, so as not to interrupt his visit to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. That is, the president of the Russian Federation did not want to interrupt Trump's talks. There could be a meeting without me, because there's a deal without me. There's a lot of hatred on each side. I have very good relations. I think we will reach an agreement. We have to meet. He is talking about Putin reaching an agreement. I think Putin is tired of all this. He doesn't look very good, although he wants to look different. Don't forget, this was supposed to be over in a week. If he hadn't gotten stuck in the mud with his tanks, he would have been in Kiev in 5 hours. The tanks did not reach Kiev because the defense forces smashed those columns up and down. Trump does not want to hear that. The U.S. president also expressed confidence that his meeting with Putin would be planned and held. At the same time, he said that Volodymyr Zelenskyy has no trump cards in the negotiating position to resolve the war in Ukraine. Then I quote Trump, "In 4 days I earned 12 times more than what we spent on Ukraine, but I was angry about where the money was going to go. $60 billion. I think Zelenskyy is the best businessman in the world. Much better than me," Trump says. He comes to Washington, leaves with tens of millions of dollars every time, Trump says. The journalist also asked him about Putin and the pressure on Putin. Zelenskyy is the best salesman in the world, much better than me. The reporter asks him again, "I'm asking about Putin." He continues, "The Europeans spent 100 billion, we spent 350 billion. The reporter says again, "How are you going to nail Putin?" Trump said, "Wait a minute." This was in an interview with CNN. Then he gave a commentary to Fox News where he promised unprecedented sanctions against Russia. President Trump said that he would impose crippling sanctions on Russia if the negotiations with Ukraine fail. The 47th said this in an interview with Fox News, the Republican mouthpiece for the media union, commenting on Senator Lindsey Graham's bill on tough sanctions against the Russian Federation. Let me remind you that this bill provides for 500% duties for countries that buy energy from Russia. If a country buys oil or gas from Russia, it is subject to 500% duties in trade with the United States. The American leader noted that he used sanctions leverage against Venezuela and Iran. Honestly, I will impose sanctions if we don't make a deal, and he will now follow the development of the talks in Turkey, the first round of which took place yesterday, May 16th. This is Turkey's time. We're talking about Turkey, and we'll see what happens. It will be a crushing defeat for Russia because they are having a hard time in the economy. Oil prices are low. Trump expressed confidence to reach a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, as he has a very good relationship with Putin. He says, if I impose strong sanctions, if Russia refuses to sign any agreements. But we have already seen that Russia does not agree to anything. Donald Trump. Look, since January 20th, when you became president, can you write down at least one concession and demonstrate what Russia has done? For the fourth time, the ceasefire has been rejected. Russia says we will cease fire if the Ukrainian armed forces withdraw from 4 regions. The United States and Ukraine agreed to a 30-day cessation in Riyadh, in Jeddah. Did Russia accept the offers? No. Does it now agree to a 30-day ultimatum? No, it does not. And Trump says that Putin is ready to sign the agreement and Zelenskyy has no trump cards. Is Putin really ready to sign a ceasefire agreement? When will Ukraine leave 4 of its regions? And does that suit you, Trump? Witkoff spoke very well into his ears, and he is carrying the rhetoric of Steve Witkoff, the special representative for the Middle East, who, by the way, was not in Turkey. We must understand that all of Witkoff's statements about Ukraine were in the context of negotiations with Putin on the Middle East, Iran, and nuclear agreements. That is, Witkoff is ready to trade Ukraine for anything. What is the reaction of world leaders to the Istanbul meetings? The talks in Turkey revealed the Russian Federation has no revealing its intentions. Polish PM Donald Tusk stated. He said that the main task of politicians is to preserve European and American unity on the war in Ukraine. The Russian side was not going to negotiate in the presence of the American side. The Russian side set conditions that were unacceptable for all of us. Russia's position can hardly be called constructive. We are probably going to have very difficult days ahead. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrote on his X network that Kremlin ruler Putin must be held accountable for opposing peace. People in Ukraine and around the world have paid the price for Putin's aggression. Now he must pay the price for avoiding peace. I will not allow Russia to break the ceasefire. Britain always stands with Ukraine. Italian PM Giorgia Meloni urged partners to insist on an unconditional ceasefire and a peace agreement for Ukraine's security guarantees. We should not give up. During these hours, we have seen, in contrast to some propaganda, who is actually ready to take important steps in favor of peace, and who is clearly less ready, she said. French President Emmanuel Macron said he hoped Trump would punish Putin for his cynicism. He also said that in the coming days, Trump and Putin might talk on the phone about a meeting in Istanbul. Whatever they talk about and what they can agree on is unlikely to be good for us. Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski believes that China is the country that could put Vladimir Putin in his place. He said this in an interview with one of the publications. Sikorski is sure that the country that could do this is Beijing. Russia is now economically a vassal of China, he says. although he says and suggests that China is not interested and it is unlikely that it can put pressure on Russia now. It shows now Trump's double game, not even Trump's double game. He is in collusion with Putin, direct, indirect. But the bottom line is that he says one thing to European leaders and Zelenskyy and does another. Volodymyr Zelenskyy went to the summit in Albania, where the European Political Community Summit was taking place. Turkish President Erdogan also flew there with him, and they left together on different planes. Zelenskyy said, if the Russians refuse a complete and unconditional ceasefire and killings, there should be strong sanctions. Pressure on Russia should be maintained until Russia is ready to end the war. This was said after the coalition of the willing had met and had had a telephone conversation on Macron's initiative. He dialed Trump last week on Saturday, and it was 7 a.m, American time. They allegedly enlisted his support in putting pressure on Russia. But Trump arrived at the White House and said that Putin wants peace, wants negotiations. The Western press writes that Trump is pulling Putin out of isolation, giving him the green light for his actions, and Putin is demanding all of this in negotiations. Trump gives Putin the go-ahead to do so by inaction. Trump has decided that instead of putting new pressure on Russia, he needs to meet with Putin, the Wall Street Journal reports. After the talks in Istanbul, the Wall Street Journal writes that although U.S. officials expressed their disappointment, Trump's conclusion, apparently, is that instead of putting new pressure on Putin, he is unblocking his path and untying his hands. Putin's goal has always been to meet with Trump one-on-one to discuss the future of Ukraine and Europe without Zelenskyy or European leaders present. If this summit takes place without major concessions from Russia in advance, Putin's defiance in the talks in Turkey will pay off with interest, European diplomats said. No one will punish Putin or put pressure on him. The Telegraph writes, Russia has effectively disrupted the talks in Istanbul, and now the U.S. president intends to reward the Kremlin for such actions. A personal meeting between Putin and Trump would be the worst-case scenario, a nightmare for Ukraine. The original idea of the talks in Turkey belonged to the Kremlin. So, European leaders hoped that the Russian president's failure to attend the meeting in Istanbul would finally make Donald Trump's patience break. But the U.S. president has once again shown that he has infinite patience when it comes to dictator Putin. Nothing will happen until Putin and I meet, Trump said, the Telegraph article writes. In Putin's eyes, personal talks with the U.S. president are precisely what demonstrate Russia's greatness and status as a global power, which is exactly what Putin wants, dividing the world into two with an overseas hegemon. And it is the scenario of Putin and Trump meeting with each other that is the worst-case scenario for Kyiv, Telegraph writes. The author of the Telegraph article notes that Ukrainians fear the consequences of such a meeting because Trump is vulnerable to Putin, to whom he has an instinctive affection. This is true. He constantly indulges it. What is the point, the Telegraph writes? I cannot agree that this is a nightmare for us. It is not a nightmare for us, and everyone recognizes that this is Putin's failure. But Trump says, no, there are steps. The United States is offering to play by the rules that are absolutely written for the Kremlin. We are trying to play by these rules, and we, Ukraine and Zelenskyy, agree to all the conditions that Donald Trump offers. And we immediately agree and still see that we don't have cards. Again, Trump is defending Russia's position. It is very important, as you remember, that the United States ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, resigned. She is no longer silent about the real reasons why she resigned. Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Brigitte Brink, said she resigned because she disagreed with the foreign policy of the Donald Trump administration. She wrote about this in her column for the Detroit Free Press. Here's a quote from the former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. "I just returned home to Michigan after 3 years in the most challenging job of my life. As the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, supporting our democratic ally in the fight against Russia's brutal, unprovoked aggression." She was proud to have served 5 presidents. She is not a supporter of any force in the United States, either Democrats or Republicans. 5 presidents, both Republicans and Democrats. And she has always adhered to her duty to implement U.S. foreign policy. At the same time, Brink emphasized that the Trump administration's policy from the very beginning was focused on putting pressure on Ukraine, on the victim, not the aggressor Russia. "I could no longer implement this policy in good faith and considered it my duty to resign," she explained. After almost 30 years of service, she decided to resign as U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. "I can't stand by," Brink says. "When a country is invaded, democracy is bombed and children are killed with impunity. The only way to protect U.S. interests is to defend democracy and stand up to autocrats. Peace at any cost is not peace, it is appeasement. And history has shown time and again that appeasement does not lead to security and prosperity, but to new war and suffering." Let me remind you that Volodymyr Zelenskyy criticized Brink back in April because, remember, there was a terrible attack on Kryvyi Rih where 20 people died. She wrote on official social media that this is why this war must stop and why the U.S. president wants to stop this war without specifying who the aggressor is. Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Ukraine condemned such statements as the United States cannot even name who attacked and killed our children and people. And when there was a terrible ballistic attack on Sumy, she posted that it was Russia that bombed both Kryvyi Rih and Sumy. She had already decided that she would leave her post. But a top official, a former U.S. official, is openly saying that Trump is putting pressure on Ukraine, not Russia. And what about Europe? Europe is ready to help further. It understands that the United States is an unreliable partner, and therefore there are key agreements or moves to transfer weapons to Ukraine. Chargé d'affaires of Poland in Ukraine, Piotr Lukasiewicz, said that negotiations are ongoing over the transfer of Polish MiG-29s. They are now being gradually replaced by F-16s in Poland. This primarily depends on the Ukrainian side, as it is now focused on mastering new types of weapons, such as Gripen and F-16 aircraft. The chargé d'affaires of Poland is being a little disingenuous. When Ukraine and Poland signed bilateral security agreements last year, they included a provision about the MiG-29. The United States gave the go-ahead for the transfer, but Poland refused. And the Poles did not promise anything. They themselves need these MiGs to protect their skies. Now they are ready to hand them over, although they have not because we were busy. So be it. The main thing is that we get the MiGs. These MiG-29s are different from the ones we have. They have been updated by the Americans, they have updated radars, avionics, and in general, it is a slightly different machine, more modern than what we have. This is very good. We need it. A squadron can come from them. Also Denmark, the European Solidarity Summit in Albania. Yesterday, Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with the leaders of European countries, among others. Zelenskyy met with Danish PM Mette Frederiksen. She said that the 26th aid package for Ukraine has already been formed. I am very grateful to the country of Denmark, to the Scandinavian countries in general. They give a phenomenal amount in relation to their gross domestic product. In a conversation with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Dutch Minister Dick Schoof said that they had tripled their funding for Ukraine this year. It is also known that Germany will continue to support, as stated by Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, who also condemned Putin and his unwillingness to engage in any peaceful processes. In other words, the whole world is putting pressure on Russia. Only Putin is to blame for the war in Ukraine. Only Putin should make some contacts, and only Trump does nothing about it. And the Europeans are preparing a package of sanctions. On May 20th, the 17th package of sanctions against Russia is to be approved. In addition, there should be 3 packages to this main package of sanctions. It will take into account Russia's hybrid activities, and a large number of individuals will be sanctioned. Also on human rights violations in Russia itself, as well as the use of chemical weapons. And they are already saying that the 18th package of sanctions is being developed. The 18th package of sanctions against Russia is planned to include restrictive measures against Russian banks and third-country banks that support Russia's military machine. This is very important because it can actually be called secondary to third countries, and then Russia will be even more isolated. In conclusion, I would like to mention that there are 3 additional packages of sanctions to the 17th package, and the last one, as I have already quoted to you, is for the use of chemical weapons, and the European Union will impose sanctions on both companies and individuals. And the best sanctions are imposed by Maluk and Budanov. Maluk is the security service of Ukraine, and so is Budanov. They are actively eliminating all the occupiers who bring pain and murder to our country.